Welcome back to Not Enough Projects. Today we got a new one for you, 73 Dodge Dart. Let me show you guys around and tell you what the plans are for it. So this is a customer car. It's got a 225 slant 6 in it, if I remember correctly. Hasn't been sitting very long. You see it's tagged for 2017 and the battery has a warranty date of 2019. So fairly new, must have been running pretty soon. I know basically nothing about this car. It's just dropped off, and if it were me, I would fix it up. Fix up the slant 6, get it, driving, and it would just be an awesome daily driver. But this is not my car, so who cares what I think. We're going to be doing a Magnum V8 swap into this thing because the owner wants a little bit more power than the slant 6 is willing to give. Overall, the car's in, I'd say, acceptable shape. It's not by any means the best example of a 73 Dart that you're going to be able to find, but it's not that bad. This is about the worst of it. A little bit of rust there on the hard top. It's got some dings and dents. Glass is mostly intact. The interior is all here. Door panels are pretty nice. But beyond that, it starts getting a little worse. Dash isn't bad. It looks actually pretty nice, but it's cracked, of course. I don't know why, but the instrument cluster's pulled out and set here. Again, I know no history. Looks like it's broken too. The floor, well, it's got the factory floor vents. A big floor vent. That's alright. That shouldn't be too big of a deal. We'll probably end up dealing with that. Load some new patch panels in. Not a huge deal. Headliner's a little rough. But, it's all here. See if we got anything going on in the glove box. Nope. Nothing. Except for an old wasp nest. I guess we do have I don't know what this is for. Parts receipt for 72088 E-Box. I don't know what that is. E-Box. Looks like this car came from Washington. So it's not the most optioned out car there is. It's only got the one driver's side mirror, roll up crank windows. Looks like just an AM radio, no AC, which is gonna make it real easy on us. It does have power steering though, which I was kind of surprised about, but it has it, so there you go. Looks like we're gonna have some fun electrical stuff to deal with. It's always exciting. Yeah, first things first, let's get the slant 6 out, since we're not going to be dealing with that. I wish we were. I really like the slant 6, but hey, not our car. Did forget to mention, it is a slant 6 with, I'm guessing, what is a 904? Any Mopar guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's just a 904 with the slant 6 bell housing. So obviously we're going to need to get a new transmission that's going to fit the Magnum. Probably end up going with a 727. I don't think 46RE will fit in here, plus I don't want to deal with all the electrical control. Unless he's wanting to go fuel injection, I don't know. But more than likely we're probably just going to be going carburetor, manifold, and carb. So pulling the motor out of one of these is pretty much the easiest process you can imagine. I mean, I'm not even going to go through it step by step. I'll just set you guys up and time lapse it. But I'll probably take the rad out just so we get a little bit more clearance. I don't think I'm going to take the trans and engine out as a unit. I'll probably just unbolt the bell housing, unbolt the torque converter, motor mounts, out she comes. Pretty simple. Alright, there we go. Job done. I think that took less than an hour, so Not bad at all. Probably should have supported the transmission because she kind of jumped down. You guys saw that, but whatever. She'll be fine. Plus, we're never going to use that transmission, so no big deal. So for the Magnum swap, obviously it's basically the same exact physical profile as the LA engines, which these came with LA V8s. So they did have a different K member. But as far as I know, you can either switch the K member, which I don't know if there's reproductions, if there are, man, going that way. But I know there's a couple companies that also make conversion mounts that properly locate the V8s with the slant 6 motor mounts on the K member. So I don't know, we'll do some looking into there. The power steering is gonna maybe affect our swap a little bit. I thought it had manual steering, but it's power steering, which, I mean, it came with power steering V8s, so no big deal there. It's just the exhaust is going to be a little annoying, but that'll be alright. May need to go with just manifolds, we'll see. But there we go, step 1 complete. I guess next we'll get this all cleaned up. So here is our junkyard 360 Magnum back from the machine shop. I tore it down, I believe. I lost the footage for that, but if you're interested in a teardown and kind of initial inspection into one of these traditional American V8s, check out the 360 that we tore down for the RV project. So at the machine shop, this thing was bored and honed, hot tanked, obviously. You can see how much cleaner it is now. And the rotating assembly was also balanced because the piston weight difference is big enough that it needed that. I'll show you the aftermarket pistons here in just a little bit. And it also got new cam bearings installed. And of course we had the crank looked over and it cleaned up fine with the polish. So now that we've got our engine, we need to paint it. And you can see this is kind of a rusty exterior engine. It's going to clean up just fine. We still got paint flakes we're going to have to take off and deal with. The engine is clean, but it needs a final clean. So that's what we're going to do first. Actually, first we're going to grind all of the old paint off and get it de-rusted. Then we're going to probably start into the initial clean and paint. Alright, so we're going to start off on the sides, which is the crustiest. We need to get all of the old paint off and the rust. So we're going to use a wire wheel. Now obviously we want to keep as much metal and shed wires out of the engine as we can. So we're going to try to aim everything so it stays out of the engine. It's not a huge deal if we do get it kind of dirty inside, because it's still dirty from machining, and we're going to do a final clean. Alright, now that we've got most of this stuff removed, we're going to go in with a small wire attachment on a drill so we can get in all these little crevices and get all the loose paint removed is the biggest thing. Alright, so we're pretty close to fully stripped down. Now we'll go ahead and prep the surface. We need to degrease it. There's some paint in places that's held on pretty good. It's basically sanded down smooth, so it's not going to affect the finish. So we should be fine there. If it's held on after all that, it's going to hold on with some more paint on. So we'll go ahead and start degreasing and cleaning on this. Alright, now that we're pretty well degreased, we're going to actually take a torch and heat the surface to remove any oils, because I mean you can only imagine how much oil and gack is in the pores of the cast iron. So heat it up. Now, this painting method I actually got turned on to by Uncle Tony's Garage. Here's a channel on YouTube. You can see it all burning off. I've used spray paint a lot in the past, and it holds up okay, but it is pretty prone to getting removed with gasoline or chipping and that kind of thing. So the brush on Rust-Oleum stuff works pretty good, especially if you prep it right. You can see all that crap burning off. Alright, so I've gone around with the torch all over this block and sweated out all the moisture and volatiles. So now we're pretty close to getting ready to paint. We've sweated all that crap out, but it's still sitting on the surface, some of it. So we're going to go back over, and you can see there's still some junk on the surface. We're going to go back over with a solvent. I'm going to use brake cleaner, which is what I got. You can use acetone or whatever. Do a final clean, and then we'll finally be ready to mask it off and paint. Alright, so we're all masked up. I went a little overboard on the precision or whatever you want to call it. It isn't a big deal. It's basically just however much of a job you want to make it. Like these little overhangs and stuff, they don't get covered by the head. I like to paint them because they'll rust over time, but you're not going to hurt anything if you just, you know, kind of slap it on there. So now we're pretty much ready to just go ahead and start brushing on our primer. I'm going to use Rust-Oleum Rusty Metal Primer, and then we'll let that dry and we can get some color on this. So here we are. You want to mix it up really well if you're doing this too. I've already shaken it up quite a bit. Alright, I believe that just about covers all of our bases. So we're going to let this dry probably for about a day, and then we'll go ahead and start coating our color on. Alright, so I've let this dry for a couple days now just because it's been kind of cold. So obviously it's going to dry slower. But now I think we're ready to go ahead and put our first coat of color on. So let's start doing that. We're going with this color. Unfortunately, at most hardware stores, there's not a bunch of colors to choose from for this brush on stuff. But hopefully this is going to look pretty good. I think it'll be fine. Alright, so it's been drying. I did a couple more coats just to get full coverage. I'm happy with how it's looking, so we can go ahead and peel back all of our masking tape. Alright, so now that we've got the masking tape all off, we need to go ahead and give this thing a final clean. It's pretty clean because it came back from the machine shop and was hot tanked, but you can see we still got a bunch of machining junk and junk that fell on it while we were painting. So we're going to give it a final clean before we actually start assembly. Now we're going to want to really clean our oil galleries. So I went ahead and popped these plugs out for the lifter galleries. They use kind of an oddball 5/16 square drive. I didn't have square drive sockets and I couldn't find one locally, so I just made this out of scrap. Just grind it down, 5/16. You can see it actually bent because it's not heat treated, and these were in tight. So we'll have to make sure we get them in tight. And also on the front of these galleries, we've got these press-in plugs that are little. Now sometimes you can remove them from the front by pounding with a screwdriver and flipping them. I wasn't so lucky this time; it pounded in. So you have to use a dowel or some kind of long rod. This is a 1/2-inch rod. It's just about the right size. And you thread it through these bores, and it looks like we got another plug right there to take out. And then you just pound on it with a hammer. You see how it goes through on this side until you get the plug out. You can see we're through all the way on this side, so I'll pop this plug out down there, and then we can get the other plug out. So now we've got all our plugs out. I like to do just a soap and water wash as the kind of final cleaning, just like with a garden hose. And we're going to want to have the air compressor ready with a blowgun, and once it's dry from that, we'll give it a misting with WD just to keep it from flash rusting. I like to use a brush to really get in here and try to clean the bores out. And then we'll give this a clean before we put the pistons in with acetone, because a lot of the machining grit likes to stick in the crosshatch. So we'll make sure to get that clean. We just want to get everything out of the oil galleries that we can. Make sure our lifter bores are clean and any dirt is gone, because dirt is not the friend of engines. So let's start washing it. Alright, now we're also going to want to make sure all of our gasket surfaces are prepped. Pretty much everything is actually really clean already, but I'm going to go ahead and run a Scotch-Brite pad over the deck just to make sure there's nothing else on there. You know, so around the timing cover and valley walls, and then we'll rinse all of the grit off. Alright, so I think we're just about good. We've thoroughly sprayed out all of our oil passages, and if you're dealing with a block that hasn't been hot tanked, or even after hot tanking, this is something you definitely want to check. It's a good idea to clean out all of the oil passages with like a rifle brush, because a lot of grit and crud can get collected in there, especially if it's not gone through some kind of solvent dip. Also, the cooling passages, the water jackets can get really cruddy. These are really clean because the hot tank dissolved it all, but it's still something you want to check, and you want to verify that there's no big chunks or crust in there, or else that's going to obviously affect your cooling system. So now we're going to go ahead and blow off all the excess water and make sure it's not going to rust. Okay, so now from this point on, we're going to want to be really intentional about fully covering the engine, preventing any kind of dirt or dust or anything to get on the engine. I like to use just big black trash bags. They work really well, and you can kind of wrap them around the end of the engine stand to make sure nothing can get in there. But now we're ready to go ahead and start assembling short block. Alright, so now we're about ready to get the short block together. Let's go ahead and start off by getting all of our plugs in. We'll do the core plugs first because they're easy to get to. I like to go with brass plugs because there's no risk of any rust. And they're like $2 more expensive or something, so definitely worth it in my book. So I like to go through with just some sandpaper and clean up the sealing surfaces of the core plug, freeze plug, expansion plug, whatever you want to call it. Plus we have a little bit of paint in there. Alright, so I like to use just a little bit of Permatex Aviation, or I think it's also Indian Head, just non-hardening sealer. A lot of people install them dry, which is fine. I don't know how much this actually does, but it makes me feel warm and fuzzy at night, so I do it. And I also like to line the writing up, not that it matters. Alright, so now I'll just go ahead and tap her home. Bolt head sticks out a little bit too much, so let's go without. We're going to have to touch up the paint. Probably should have installed these first, honestly. Alright, now I'll just go through and do that 5 more times. Alright, we've got all our core plugs in. There's 6 on the sides, and then we have 2 in the front. There's also 2 in the back of the block in the bell housing area that we can't get to because of the engine stand, so we'll do that once we take it off the stand. We'll also go ahead and do our oil galley plugs. There's 2 up here, and then there's 2 in the back. There's actually 3. They're threaded like you saw earlier. So let's go ahead and get these little guys in. Alright, we'll also go ahead and get our threaded block plugs back in. Again, non-hardening sealant. Actually, I just realized, do not forget the inner one that goes through the distributor area. I ended up just grinding down a 3/8 extension into about a 5/16 square drive to access this one. Alright, so for the cam plug, there's 2 different styles. There's this kind of just cup type, which I believe is used on the older LA motors. And then we've got this crimped type, which we're going to use, and it goes this side in, like that. And there's a machine step, so it's not like, I think small block Fords, the cam bearing is just right there, so you only want to go flush. This one has an actual step, so you can just bottom it out. So there's all our plugs. I'll flip it over. We're just about ready to put the crank in. We're going to do a final clean on the mains behind the bearings. We don't want any oil or anything back here. So I like to just use acetone on a lint-free towel. We'll go ahead and use. Brake clean's fine too. Basically just acetone and aerosol. Now we're going to want to go through and make sure all of our threads are really clean. We should be able to go in by hand with no resistance at all. And you can see we're actually getting some bubbling out with that liquid. You don't want any liquid in the threads, or else you're going to get like a hydraulic lock when you go to torque it. And you won't get a true torque value. Alright, all of our threads feel great. So we should be ready to get our bearings on. We're going to give the main caps all a clean because we didn't clean them yet. And then we'll be able to torque the crank down. Alright, so first things we gotta do before we get the crank in is we need to install a rear main seal. Now, the small block Mopars have a 2-piece rear main versus like the small block Fords of the 90s that had a 1-piece rear main. The 1-pieces are kind of nice because they're just easy, just put them in and set and forget pretty much. These ones you gotta be a little bit more intentional with because they're 2 pieces. So first thing we're gonna do is clean in this groove. Make sure it's already clean, but we're gonna make sure there's nothing else in there. This second recess or cutout is for the like shield on the crank, and that just keeps as much oil as possible away from the seal, and then the seal seals in anything that gets past that disc. Alright, so now we're able to put our seal in. The top and bottom halves are the same, and we just have to be careful to make sure we put the large lip in. That way any oil pressure is pushing against the large cavity, which causes pressure to be applied to the lip and seal. This way it's a lot easier to push past, so if you get it backwards, you'll probably have a leak. Now we're going to make sure the backside of the bearing area on the block is completely free of oil. We've already cleaned it with acetone, but we want to make sure there's no foreign material behind here. Now we can put our main bearing halves in. So you can see there's 2 different types. One of them has a groove and a hole for the oil, and one is just a solid bearing. The one with the hole, of course, is going to go to the block where the oil feed is. So this is the thrust bearing. It goes right here in the number 3 bearing. Should fit in nice and tight. And you can see there's actually different width bearings. So we're going to need to make sure to match our widths up. The largest one is going to be for back here. And the rest of them should be all the same. Alright, let's go ahead and lube her up. Also lube our seal up. You always want to pre-lube seals, unless they're Teflon, then you don't. These are not Teflon, these are just rubber. Alright, so I went through and cleaned the crank really well. You want to go through and clean all the passages, I'll show you. But we're going to bring it over here and we can drop it down on top of the bearings. Okay, so all these holes are drilled from the rods to the mains because the mains supply the oil for the rods. And you want to make sure, you want to run like a pipe cleaner or a rifle brush through the passages, all of them, and make sure there's nothing in there. Because obviously there's metal, flakes, or anything that's going to get into your bearings and not be good. You also want to just clean the whole crank down, even though this one was cleaned at the machine shop, so it was just kind of a secondary clean to make sure there wasn't any machining gunk left on it. So now we need to put the caps on, and we're just going to test fit the caps for the clearances. So we'll put them all down and we're going to use plastic gauge and make sure all of our bearing clearances are good. They should be, but it's just kind of another fail-safe. Alright, so it's the same deal on the caps. Put those in. Alright. Now they are numbered, and you know, if you put them in wrong, you're going to have some issues, so make sure to put them in right. Plastic gauge, this stuff's just like a plastic that you put in and it'll expand based on the amount of space that's left in there, and you measure it against these gauges. It doesn't replace a micrometer, of course, but this was checked at the machine shop, so this is just kind of a double check And if you're just doing like a stock style refresh, honestly, if the crank looks pretty good, then you're probably fine just using plastic gauge. We're gonna go tang to tang on the bearings. Go ahead and oil our bolts up and get the threads and the heads. I'm just using like 30-weight motor oil. Just rinse and repeat for the rest of them. And personally, I like using a speed wrench to snug these up. That way you can feel how the threads are. Alright, so the final spec on these is 85 foot-pounds. We'll go ahead and go to like, I don't know, 20 or 30, which is the minimum on here. And we'll torque to the final spec. Alright, so now we just need to pop all the caps back off and check our clearances. Should be fine. Alright, so now we just compare the width of the squeezed out portion to the width of the colored portion on here. Looks like number 1 we're looking at 2 thousandths. Same deal on number 2. Number 3 same. 4 is a smidge over 2 thou. Same with 5, smidge over 2 thou. Under 2 thou rather. So we're right in spec. The spec is a half thou to 2 thou. And on kind of a hotter motor, you generally want a little bit more bearing clearance because it holds more oil. You lose a little bit of oil pressure, but if you run too tight, once you rev it up higher than the factory intended, you need a little more clearance. Anyways, we're good to go. Technically not the script is off, but I don't know, I do. Alright, so now we'll pre-lube our bearing caps. Alright, and the Fel-Pro recommends using RTV on the outside edge. Alright, now we'll just set the thrust bearing cap because we got to make sure the cap is at the same position as the lower bearing. So alright, that should be good. Now we can torque it down. Make sure we're still turning free. Alright, we're feeling good. Obviously there's some friction because the oil's so sticky, but it's free. Alright, on the final torque I like to torque and then mark, just so I know for a fact that I've gone through and torqued them. Alright, we'll go ahead and measure our end plate. You can do it with a feeler gauge too, but I've got a dial indicator, so we'll use that. So I hit the crank all the way this way. Now I'll pry it back that way and we should see how much we're working with here. Looking at about 2 thousandths. The spec is 2 to 10 thou, so we're a hair over 2 thou. We're fine. So now we can go ahead and start getting our pistons in. Alright, so we need to check all of our ring clearances, the ring gaps, before we do anything. So we're going with molly-faced rings. You can see that there. Anyways, for the top ring, which is going to be the molly ring, we're looking at 12 to 22 thou. So it looks like we're just under 22, but we're well over 12, which is fine. Our second ring, we're looking at 22 to 31 thou. So it looks like we're too tight on the second ring. So we're gonna have to open them up a little bit, file them. Just do a second check. Yeah, we're too tight. So we're gonna have to open these up. We'll open them up to the middle of the range. Since this is kind of a hotter motor, a bigger ring gap's not gonna hurt us at all. So you wanna go bigger, because what happens is the rings heat up, and if you don't have enough gap, they'll butt up at the ends and buckle, and that's when you get broken pistons. So obviously you want to avoid that. Alright, so here's our ring filer. You just set the ring on it and turn this. You don't need to turn it much, it'll take off a lot. So we'll do a little bit and check. I like to go this way. That way the burr is towards the inside of the piston rather than towards the outside of the bore. Alright, let's check that. More. So I'm just going to go back and forth and get it to probably right around, and get it probably to right around 28, somewhere around there. Alright, there we go. Got a 28 thousandths reading on that second ring. We'll also check the oil control rings just for good measure. They are not critical at all, so as long as they basically aren't butting up against each other, they're good. Yeah, looks like we do need to open it up a little bit, actually, just a hair. Spec for this is 15 to 55 thou, which is a pretty big range. Yeah. Keep working on that. So once this is good, we'll I'm just gonna go around and do the exact same thing 7 more times, and then we're gonna assemble the pistons. Alright, so we've got all the rings gapped. We'll go ahead and check them one more time as we assemble all the pistons. We're going to give these a final clean. You can see they're already really clean, but we'll wipe them down, especially on the big end of the rod. Make sure there's no debris on the piston. So I'm going to recheck these real quick, and then we'll start assembling our pistons. Alright, so all of our ring clearances checked out. We can go ahead and assemble. So we're going to start with the lowest ring land down. Start with our oil ring expander. I've never really found ring expanders to be very helpful. I mean, like the pliers, not the oil ring expander. Obviously you need that. You just roll them on. I've always found that to be kind of the easiest way. Fun fact, Slinkies, the spring toy, were actually originally made in a piston ring factory. They just coiled up a bunch of piston ring, because as piston rings are manufactured, it's like a spring. That's what they are. You see, so they coil up, and there you go, you got a Slinky, and it's just the oil ring uncut, basically. So kind of a neat fact there. People go crazy about clocking the ring gaps, and honestly it's not a big deal because they spin. So you basically, I mean, as long as you're not lining them up, even if you line them up, you're fine, honestly, but good practice to make sure that you're not doing that. And our second ring has top written on it. When in doubt, just look at the instructions. And our top ring looks like it has a chamfer on one. Oh, no, it doesn't actually. Looks like it's bidirectional. So you can see we've got a bevel on either side. So this, it doesn't matter the orientation. There we go. Now, let's oil this up some so we can get it down into its bore. We're going to need to take the cap off, which these are torqued because the machine shop honed these rods. You can see fresh hone marks. And on these, the tangs go together. You see there. These are all balanced, so they were already marked at the machine shop. They need to go in their respective cylinders. The original pistons are dog dish pistons. This is going to give us a good bump up in compression, about 10 to 10.5 to 1, depending on how far down in the hole it is. I am not exactly sure yet. We're going to find out. But with the rest of the dish filled in, we have a pretty substantial increase in piston weight, so the whole rotating assembly needed rebalanced. Not a big deal, but we got to make sure that these go in where they need to go. Don't need to go too crazy. We just want to oil it up so it slides in nice. Do you want to get your wrist pin too, but they're already pre-lubed from when the machine shop installed them. Alright, I also went ahead, did a final clean of the bore. You want it to come out squeaky clean. So now we are ready to pop her down in. Alright, so we want our crank at top dead center, just so the rod gets seated right away. Alright, so these pistons in particular don't have a mark towards the front, but we can tell it's this way because the cheek of the crank is chamfered, and the rod has to be chamfered. You see how the sides are different? So this is going to go towards the outside of the crank. I'm going to be careful not to nick the crank with our rod bolts. Wow, great. We are at 0 deck. That is awesome. I wasn't exactly sure where we were going to be because in production motors the deck height can vary a little bit between engines, and so it's kind of hard to calculate exactly where you're going to be based off the difference in compression height from the stock piston versus this aftermarket piston, but it's looking like we're going to be at basically exactly 0 deck, which is great. We actually need to take a clearance measurement. Accidentally pre-lubed before. Alright, so for the connecting rod caps we're looking at 45 foot-pounds. And we're going to want to be careful not to spin the engine. Otherwise we can mess up our plastic gauge measurement. And you don't want to oil these bolts. Studs. So we're looking at between 1.5 and 2 thou. So we're good because the spec is a half thou to 2.2 thou, so we are well within that, and we're on the loose end, which is good. A loose engine is what you want when you're going to be having a little bit of a hotter motor. So we can go ahead and torque this for good. Alright, so we've got all of our rotating assembly in. We're looking really good. We're going to go ahead and measure exactly where the piston is relative to the deck. It feels like it's very close to 0 deck, but we'll be able to get a pretty good measurement with just some calipers. Alright, so we got the rotating assembly all sorted out for the Dart. Next time we're going to be putting the valve train together, so I will see you then.